Hey, well, thank you so much for being willing to do this and taking the time to do this.
Thank you. It's a privilege. I didn't know what would happen when I made that submission, but I'm so happy that it's just not some computer algorithm, and that made me happy.
No, we've got a lot of submissions, and we have a team that go through and kind of get the ones that aren't really real submissions. And of course, they came across yours and they said you got to see this, and of course I have. But I appreciate. Where are you? I guess zooming from?
I'm zooming from Tennessee, actually Nashville, Tennessee, but I'm in a little small section called Old Hickory right now.
Okay. Okay. Well, very cool. Very cool. Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to kick things off here. And what I'd love to do is sort of ask you, just for the people who haven't seen the video yet, can you explain the video? Obviously who's in it, which is you, the message behind it, and the organization, Unheard Voices, that it supports, and just give us a little bit of information on it, please.
Well, first of all, thank you again. My name is Rahim Buford, and I am the founder of the Unheard Voices Outreach. And basically, it's an organization that gives a platform and a voice to a marginalized group of individuals. And these are people who are formerly incarcerated, people who made parole, expired a sentence, who were once in prison. And when they come out, when we get out, it's a very difficult task to sometimes just get a job, find housing, and even be received in a trusting way because of the past. And so that particular video that you're talking about was a piece that I did with an organization calling All Crows, and they wanted to raise awareness around some of the struggles and the plights of formerly incarcerated people. And that particular piece was just me sharing my real life experiences and channeling some of the voices of the insiders. Those are people in prison. We don't use names like inmate, convict, and anything that's dehumanizing. And so,
Sure.
in a nutshell, I think that's it.
I mean, forgive me. I don't know anything that you know, and to hear this coming from you is I don't want to say it's all new to me in the sense that I've never heard anything before, but it
Yeah.
certainly is new. I've never heard anyone say that, we don't use these terms because of how dehumanizing it is, and that makes perfect sense. And for someone to have been, and forgive me if I use the incorrect terminology, but convicted of a crime, served a sentence, has come out, you're saying, these are humans. They've made a mistake. I heard you say in your video, especially when they were young and maybe had no other choice. Whatever the situation was, they are humans. They've done what they've done. They're out now, and you want to bring, I guess, attention and awareness to the fact that they are humans and they deserve a second chance. And they deserve to be treated like anyone else. I mean, is that a semi-accurate?
That is, and I think it's important to note that people go to prison as a punishment. That is the consequences of bad conduct, whether intentional or not.
Well,
But
yeah.
in our society, there is supposed to be an ideal that when change has occurred, transformation has occurred, and a person has done what he or she has been punished for, being released from prison, you should not leave a prison and go into a different type of a prison. And basically, that's what happens due to what is called felоnism. And felоnism is the political, the social, economic marginalization and legal discrimination against people who have been convicted of felonies. And it's not something that we pay a lot of attention to. But if just in my state alone, more than 430,000 Tennesseans cannot vote due to a felony conviction. And this is very problematic when you understand how important voting rights are. But as it stands with people like me, voting is only a privilege. You can take a privilege away, but you can't take a right away. And so if voting was a right, it would be something that at least I would have some type of due process before you took that away from me. And in Tennessee in the 80s, the legislators at that time, they were Democrats. Some say they reverted to being Republicans. I don't know. They passed legislation that said if a person was convicted of a felony, anyone, the voting rights could be taken. And somehow this is constitutional. And I'm saying that that's worthy of a challenge, because if you can't take First Amendment rights, you can't take due process rights and various other rights. It would seem to me that voting is the most essential component to my citizenship. And I was born in America. And so for my rights to be taken, and I did not commit treason, and nobody that I know of that was in prison with me in a state prison committed treason. And treason is the only reason why someone should lose his or her citizenship rights.
I have never heard it put that way, which is crazy. And I appreciate you educating me on this. Coming, you say in your video, I think American privilege and certainly white privilege and so many other privileges. I don't spend a lot of time considering this from that point of view. And I couldn't agree with you more in your points about voting rights. It makes perfect sense. And yeah, I'm sort of ashamed for not even considering it. But I thank you for that. And you said it, release from prison is not freedom. Freedom is a mindset. Freedom is justice. What does freedom mean to you? And you've just explained that. So, because you submitted this, I'm curious, when you saw this campaign out there and you saw it come from sort of this Star Trek background, what was it that appealed to you that made you say, this is what gives me hope for the future. This is what I want to submit.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So in the 90s, when Star Trek The Next Generation came out, one of the ways that I was able to escape being in prison was to look forward to those shows with Luke Picard and the whole crew, Data. And one of the things that made me really just have a strong feeling about never missing one of those shows is that was the imagination and the exploration of freedom. See, there was no Earth. There was this vast universe and this encounter with new life forms. And you never really knew what to expect, but there was always a message in every episode. And so those episodes really helped me as I thought about my own life and what freedom meant, because it took the imagination to even conceive of such. Because some people can't move beyond what we call Earth life. And so in order to be free in a place like prison, you have to have the imagination, which is why freedom is a mindset. Because actually just, leaving prison is a physical body being changing location from one restricted move to another. But if this were the free world, why does everything cost? There is not one thing in my country, America, that doesn't cost. Now, air costs, you go to the hospital, we pay for water. Is there anything free? And so it's not the free world in that sense, but with the imagination, those of us who believe in a more perfect union, those of us who believe in inclusivity, those of us who believe that America is an ever evolving country and a culture that can change, that's our responsibility. And that's what freedom allows for.
I love what you're saying, because, my background in Star Trek is I love the philosophy. I have this idea of a better future where we no longer fear the difference between us. We realize it's the uniqueness between not just how we look, but how we think that is the zest of life, what makes life worth living. Because of course, if we're all the same and thinking the same thing, nothing's going to change, nothing's going to evolve. And I kind of go around and I talk about this. However, I've never put it in the context of what you've just shared with me. People who have served their time and come out, they are not free. And people treat them differently because they might have a felony or a record.
Right.
And that is not the appreciation of someone or something that is different. They are the same as us because they are free Americans. However, sadly, truthfully, they are not because of what society puts on them. But I've never really looked at it through those eyes, and it's I mean, it's something to really consider. And I can't thank you enough for sharing it.
Another way, if you don't mind, as we think about Star Trek, if you remember how like sometimes when they would go to different planets and you would see different people, right? There were certain leaders who understood that like that's another life like me, but there may have been different times when some may felt different or maybe even feared. Like, I love the Cleons, and that was one of my favorite groups. And it's otherizing people, not humanizing, but otherizing. And so you can look at me and see that I look similar to you, maybe a different hue, maybe a shade or different. But the minute you learn that I have a history that society has condemned, you begin to see me in a different light, which is why in the video you were referring to, I said that if you have a problem with second chances, then you must relinquish your American privileges, because the very things that most who are in prison today, those things were done, and this country is the result of those things that have been done. And it doesn't excuse, it doesn't give a pass for conduct, which is why we went to prison. Forefathers and everybody else, nobody went to prison for all of the various injustices, atrocities that, but you and I, we are the beneficiaries. And so because of what happens to people like me, I'm reminded that I am a descendant of a slave, or those who had been enslaved, because of the way that I'm treated. And so I don't feel as though I have a choice. And I didn't really talk a lot about my history, but I was in prison for 26 years of my life, from age 18 to 44, 17 different prisons. But I didn't go to prison and become a victim, although my sister was murdered while I was in prison, and the guy received 6 years. He tried to kill my brother. I went to prison for something I didn't intend. Yes, I was doing wrong. I shot a gun into the floor, the bullet ricocheted, and it hit someone. He died. That's why I went to prison. I didn't have a criminal mindset. I was a senior in high school. And so I educated myself in prison. I left prison with 18 college credits at 3 different institutions: Vanderbilt, Lipscomb, Ohio University, and I left with a full scholarship to attend American Baptist College. I was paroled after 3 parole hearings in 2015. I enrolled immediately into college, and in 2019, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in entrepreneurial leadership. I founded Unheard Voices in 2017. I ran the Nashville Community Bail Fund from 2018 to June of 2021. And yet I sit in front of you, and my state says that as long as I live, I can never vote. I pay taxes, I follow the law, I do everything that everybody does. My body is counted during the census, and money is allocated from the federal government, the taxes that I pay. And so if taxation without representation is something that we abhor as Americans, why is it okay for that to be imposed upon a population of people who have already been punished? It undermines a democracy, and it in many cases allows a minority mindset to create a majority influence on a whole country. And if I don't say anything, I wouldn't be an American, and I love my country.
I'm blown away by this. I could not agree more. And again, I'm embarrassed that I haven't taken the time to ever consider this or look at it, especially with the critical ways that you have. So I genuinely appreciate you sharing that with me. I really don't even know what to say. I do have 2 more questions that are not part of this interview necessarily, just the opportunity of meeting you and speaking to you, if I can have just a few more moments of your time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The whole concept of, you use the word punishment, and it's cliche because people have talked about this a lot, although I don't think anything ever changes. Incarceration versus re-education, these sorts of things. I mean, it shouldn't, again, I understand that I come from tremendous amounts of privilege, so I really don't know what I'm talking about. That's why I'm asking you.
Sure.
being punished isn't really what should be happening. I mean,
Right.
whether a crime is committed or not, sure, there needs to be some sort of time to educate and give opportunity for this person to reform themselves and consider what's been done. And I'm sure it depends on the crime and these sorts of things. I just, you've served time and you use the word punishment, and I have no doubt it is punishment, but you seem to have been able to, I'm going to use the words incorrectly, take the opportunities to continue to educate yourself, and dare I say reform, because I feel that that is a derogatory way of saying what you were before, but I'm saying you've taken that opportunity to expand your knowledge and become, I don't want to say a better person, because that would imply you weren't a good person, but to become better and better. And I would just love to hear a little bit more on that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, first of all. And you can ask me anything. I think is important because you've already crossed over. And the fact that you don't understand or know a lot about these things doesn't mean that somehow you're less than or that you're not involved. It just means it wasn't on the radar at that time. And now it is. And so here's what I'll say to that. I transformed while I was in prison. Education became my liberation while I was in prison. And yes, I am a better expression of myself today than I was in 1989 when this happened and my brain was still forming. And so everyone is different. I was never, in my mind, a bad person. I did bad things, and those bad things had consequences. And yes, I went to prison as my punishment because that's the way it is designed, because the system in which we live, we respond to transgressions of the law with a retributive mindset. And a retributive mindset is the simple math of, if you do something wrong, I'm going to do something wrong to you. Meaning that if you don't enjoy what these privileges are, I'm going to take them away. I'm going to exile you. I'm going to hide you and even erase you, because some people don't make it back from prison. I saw 13 people murdered while I was there in the 26-year period. And so while that is a punishment, I agree with you that it should be based on transformation, restoration, and the word rehabilitation, no, it does not apply. It's a misnomer. It really should apply just a physical nurturing back to some place of from an injury to healing. But when it comes to a human being, there is an internal factor, psychological factor that has to be affected before a human being can change. For example, in our country, we expect 75% of all people who are released from prison to return. And so we're talking about more than 650,000 people a year. And we expect—
and that's a broken system, right? I mean, that's something's not working if that's what's happening, right? Sorry, please continue. I apologize for interrupting.
No, I love this because it's a conversation. Maybe something is actually working and maybe it is not broken, because you have to understand the design and why prisons exist. Prisons are a derivative from the 13th Amendment, which says that slavery is prohibited except if you've been duly convicted of a crime. And so in post 13th Amendment slavery, it's prison. And what it's important for Americans to understand is that this is an 86 to 90 something $billion industry a year. And wherever money is involved, people's lives are connected. And so the prison sector employs more than Walmart, GM, and Ford combined. And so there are people whose livelihood depends upon these systems that uses human beings' bodies as commodities. And while there is this narrative that there is no profit if it's a state-ran prison, that's ludicrous, because it is the body that is in a cage. We call them prisons or cells that are worth 35 to 50 and some $80,000 a year. It takes less to educate Americans than it does to what we say incarcerate. I'm going to say cage. And the reason I say that, because it's important to understand that incarceration sounds nice. Prison even sounds nice because they glamorize these things. Orange is the new black. You might look at this and think that it's some kind of fairy tale, but it's not. I mean, I had a brother who I was in a cell with three of my biological brothers over the period of 26 years. And one of my brothers went to prison with a drug problem. He left prison with a drug problem. And he was paroled last year. In less than 4 months, he OD'd. And so we have people who are being taken into this system and they're not being healed. And so you're right. It should be about something different than punishment. But right now, because the narrative that some people agree with, that if you do something wrong, you deserve to be punished. And personally, you know, my studies are in theology. It's connected to pretty much Abrahamic religions and this idea of hell and a punishment. So if God will punish me, whether I'm a Muslim or whether I'm a Christian, if I can go to hell, then it seems okay for us to punish one another. And that's just my perspective, but that's how I look at it.
No, I appreciate that very much. And we won't get into religion, but I resonate a little bit with, I mean, certainly with your take on that portion of it. And I want to nod my head as if I understand you. I certainly understand what you're saying, but I understand that I have no real concept of what you've gone through and where this knowledge has come from. So please, I just want to be, I guess, aware of that. But I can't thank you enough for sharing that. Do you mind? I have one last comment.
I'm here for as long as you need me. I'm here for as long as you need me. I took the day off.
Well, you said you love The Next Generation, and I don't know if you've ever seen the first episode of Star Trek called The Cage, which was done in 1964. It was never released. It is out there now, and it is called Star Trek: The Cage, and it was with a different. It wasn't Captain Kirk, but it did have Spock. It didn't have a few of the other characters, and I don't want to give it away, and I'll send you a link to it. It's about humans in a cage, and of course, you know, everyone's white on it, but it's still the concept of humanity not wanting, or humans not wanting to be caged. We would rather die than be caged. It kind of goes into that, and you might connect to some of it, even though it's sci-fi and it's on a planet and it doesn't exactly relate to your circumstance. It does talk about some of the themes that you mentioned. I think you might at least enjoy it.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Yeah. And the themes are matter because my belief is that sci-fi often influences what becomes the next technology. Mm-hmm. So there are things that because the imagination, wherever that comes from, it just takes the human being to believe it enough to figure out a way to manifest it. So I don't know the difference these days between sci-fi and reality. I mean, but I get what you're saying, and I'll be happy to check out that episode. Yeah,
no, I appreciate it. Again, it's the sci-fi, the technology, but Star Trek, as you know, as you said already, it's the messaging's in there, and it wasn't necessarily about looking for strange-looking aliens. It is about finding aliens that looked at the universe in a different way than we did, because we knew it was from that unique perspective we could grow our own intellect and we could evolve our own thinking, because different ideas, that's how we progress. And all I can say is you've shared thoughts with me today that I've never considered, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, I also want to say that what I'm sharing with you is very much the origins of this country, what is America, because, you know, when England was in charge of how the colonies lived their lives, and then there was this refusal to go along with this king over all of us. And so I feel very much like that's what's happening to some of the marginalized communities. There's a power dynamic that we can't see. The king is more like the Wizard of Oz. Like you hear that voice, but the voice is really power. and the political violence of taking votes from American citizens is something that is a threat to the democracy. And I think it's important that we not overlook in like where they deserve it, because you might not like my views, but if my views aren't creating the type of environment where people are harmed, then respect me. And that's kind of like where I'm coming from with this. Yeah.
Rahim, again, I can't thank you enough. I've never considered any of this in that way. So I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you being so open and honest. And I don't know if you are on a lecture circuit or if you tour or what you do with Unheard Voices.
Yeah.
But I'd love to at least follow you on some sort of social media to find out what's going on.
Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. So Rahim Buford is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Okay. Unheard Voices Outreach is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever I am invited to speak and talk about the real life experiences of currently and formerly incarcerated people, I go, because those who are closer to the problems and those that I'm speaking about are closer to the solutions. And when you look at places like Florida, and when you look at Illinois, where people are voting, walking out the gate of prisons, and when you think about what's possible for, I mean, and just if we want to put some things in context, there are countries where citizens never lose their voting rights. Israel, I'm gonna just say Israel for one. In fact, they set up voting booths inside of jails and prisons just so their citizens' voices can be heard. And I mean, it's so serious about voting in Israel, where the person who has assassinated Isaac Rabin, the prime minister, even he voted. And so this thing that we're asking for is not a new thing. And so Unheard Voices Outreach is here to represent what a second chance society can look like if we're listened to. And people should join this campaign, because our campaign is very much American, very much human, and very much what freedom means. So Unheard Voices Outreach, you can find us anywhere.
That's amazing, Rahim. Thank you. I'll definitely follow you on Instagram, because that's pretty much the only one I do, but or at least the only one I really do. Okay. So thank you so much for your time, and I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. Thank you.